Did you know that relying on social media for your business marketing can actually lead to burnout? Maybe you are there or you've been there. There are so many ways it affects not only our mental health, but also our nervous system. And when we burn out, it's much harder to recover and start again. That's why I wanted to bring Michelle in today to talk about this and how to recover from burnout so you don't end up just shutting down the doors to your business completely. We'll cover all of these topics as well as touch on the number one reason most entrepreneurs rely on social media for marketing outside of the fact that it's what we are told to do. And the answer to this may or may not surprise you, but we'll work through some ways to optimize our nervous system so that we can tackle that number one problem and get creative with our marketing so that we don't have to be so reliant on social media for it. Michelle Grosser is an attorney, pastor, nervous system expert, certified master life coach, and host of the Calm Mom podcast. Through somatic and neuroscience based modalities, she coaches women through discovering what's beneath their triggers and emotions so they can begin their healing journey and find peace in the present. She deeply believes that the most profound thing we can offer our children is our own healing. She and her husband have two daughters and live in Miami, Florida. This interview is going to be so good. So buckle up and let's get started. Hey friend, welcome to Pursuing Goals God's Way. Have you thought about finally starting that business now that your kids are older? Do you ever stay awake wondering how to mesh your passions into purposeful work? Do you have big, ambitious goals but feel overwhelmed or even unqualified to pursue them? Hey, I'm Gabe. Not too long ago, I longed for the confidence to start an online business. I just wanted to make a difference outside my home bubble using my gifts. But I kept telling myself that I wasn't good enough, I didn't know enough, and I didn't have enough time. Until I realized something huge. My kids need me to be their example, and they need to see me win. And yours do too. In this podcast, you will learn how to clarify your goals, plan with purpose, and ditch your distractions. If you're ready to make an impact and an income, all for the glory of God, then you're in the right place. As an avid runner, I believe life is one massive marathon. It's up to you to run your own race and to finish it well. So lace up those running shoes, pop in your earbuds, and let's do this thing. Are you sick of not sticking with your goals? Sick of hustle culture and want a different strategy? Tired of working on your goals alone? Are you ready to get off social media while growing your online business, but still want connection and support? I got you, friend. Join us inside the Red Hot Accountability Club so that you can lean on others and be inspired to continue working on your goals, both in business and life. Yes, you can work your goals into your lifestyle without sacrificing everything to achieve them. When you join the club, you'll gain coaching, support, and encouragement in a private online space away from the noise of social media. I host a live monthly coaching session to answer your questions and give you feedback as you work toward your business and life goals. This session is a great place to connect with others and mastermind through challenges. Feeling stuck in the in-between? No worries. With the club, you have one-on-one access to me through email or the online community. Reach out anytime you have a question or need a little direction. Inside the Red Hot Accountability Club, you will own your own results, hold yourself accountable, and lean on others for support. If you've been looking for a simple, off-social media way to grow, then this is it. Head to redhotmindset.com/RHA to learn more and join us today. Again, that's redhotmindset.com/RHA, and I can't wait to welcome you inside the club. Hey, Michelle, thank you so much for hanging out with me here today. So excited to dive into our conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we get started, I would love if you just share a little bit about your relationship with social media. How do you use it for personal and business? And what are some boundaries you've set up for yourself?
Yeah. So I'm someone who doesn't spend a ton of time on social media. It's even before starting an online business, that wasn't a space that I spent a lot of time. So now that I have a podcast and that I have an online coaching business, I've try to be more intentional about showing up online and really trying to build community online. But it is just such a small part of how we're marketing what it is that we're doing. Really, most of our leads are coming through our podcast. So we do have some systems in place to put things and repurpose them and put them out on social media. But really, it's been quite seasonal. There have been times when we're really on it and stuff is going out consistently. And then there have been other times when we have a lot of other priorities and we might even go weeks or even months sometimes without posting anything on social media. And through the years, I have learned to release that and be okay with that and not have it cause me any sort of guilt or get stuck in all of the shoulds of how you build a successful business. And as far as some boundaries around it, I mean, there have been seasons in my life where I've just removed the apps altogether. There have been seasons where I've just removed the apps from my home screen. So they're just not there, especially when I notice a pull to go to them without even realizing that I'm doing that. I'm like, okay, this is a signal that I need to remove myself from some of this. But yeah, just probably like a lot of you listening, I don't do social media after a certain time. I don't keep my phone by my bed. So I don't even have the urge to kind of look at it. Certainly not in the morning. So a lot of time parameters around it to protect my nervous system ultimately, and all the things that flow through that, to use social media in a healthy way, I think.
I love it. And I think it's really important. I think it's more about boundaries and using it in a healthy way than it is to completely get off, because some people really like the social media atmosphere, or it is going really well for their business. And I always say show up in the way that works for you and also where your audience is or different things like that. But just don't feel like you have to rely on it because it's not the end all be all. But I love the boundaries that you were talking about, not having it in your bed. I don't have my phone in my room, or not having the apps on the home screen, or maybe not at
Yeah.
all on your phone. So just different ways that we can set boundaries for ourselves. I love that.
Yeah, and I think also being honest about, is it actually serving me? Because I think
Mhm.
sometimes we can get caught up in some vanity metrics, or it's like, oh, I have this many followers, or I had one reel that got, 2 million views or whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, but did that actually bring, like, was there a payoff to that? Did that actually bring people into your community? Did that actually bring dollars across the line? Right. And I think that, if it's serving you, then yes, absolutely. But get honest about it. Like, is my social media actually serving me and my business? I don't want to be beholden to it. That's for sure. So I think if we can get honest there too, that's a good starting point in our assessment of how we're using it.
That is such a good point. Is it actually serving my business? Is it a place to put my time, and how much time to put in
Yeah.
there because of that?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we're talking about the social media effect on our nervous system today. We're talking about burnout and all these different things. And I know we have so much to get into. You are a nervous system expert. So, I'd love to hear just a little bit from your perspective. How does social media affect us and our nervous system?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it has to do with our relationship with it, right? So there are people who probably can use it without it having much of an impact on their nervous system. But I think for the majority of us, I mean, there's a whole industry out in Silicon Valley trying to figure out how to get us addicted to these things, right? So it's like it's created in such a way that we become addicted, that it has an impact on our nervous system. So I think some of the ways, especially as a business owner, that it has an impact is, one, I think we can get caught up in a lot of the shoulds around social media, right? So what comes with that? It's this urgency or this feel like I should be doing a certain number of things. I should be doing a certain number of posts. I should be showing up in a certain way in stories. My house has to look a certain way. My kids have to look a certain way. I have to be dressed a certain way. My hair should be done a certain way, or all of these different shoulds. And when those shoulds are not real, I think, asking ourselves if they're actually true, but when we get caught up in them, it creates a sense inside of us, this urgency or this sense of insecurity, or that something doesn't feel safe, or we're not doing what we need to do. And what that does within our brain is that there's a release of certain chemicals, certain hormones, things like cortisol and things like adrenaline, that are stress hormones. And that has an impact on our body. And what happens is that when we're chronically in a loop of putting ourselves in positions where our brain has to show up in these certain ways to protect us ultimately, and release things like cortisol and release things like adrenaline, when we do that over a sustained period of time, ultimately the storage of those hormones and chemicals and the way that they disrupt healthy communication in our body leads to burnout when we're talking about it on a physiological level. So I think getting caught up in a lot of the shoulds or the comparison or all of these different things that it can invite creates dysregulation in our system that emits a release of our stress hormones, and that can cause burnout. And that's on, I think, of more of like a brain chemistry side. There's a lot of other things about how we use our phone that have an impact on our body, right? We know about blue light and how our exposure to blue light before we rest. So if we're someone who struggles with boundaries around social media and we are scrolling, especially in the couple hours before bed, that's impacting our sleep. If our sleep isn't regulated, we're not having good sleep wake cycles, we're not getting quality sleep, that will have an impact on the state of our nervous system and ultimately on a lot of things like anxiety and overwhelm and burnout. And then even like the way in which our eyes move. there's patterns that our eyes take. If you've ever done like EMDR or certain types of therapy, there's a lot of work around the patterns of our eyes connected to the ways in which our brain functions. So when we are on social media, the patterns even of our eyes as they're going across our screen as we're scrolling has an impact on the releasing chemicals in our body, the regulation of our nervous system, and then can ultimately lead to a contribution to burnout.
Hmm. Wow, there's so much there. And actually, as I'm listening to you, I was just thinking too. I mean, our phones are an issue as well, but social media. I got exhausted when you were telling me all the things like the shoulds, and I'm going, oh yeah, I haven't thought about that in a while. But man, that's how I felt when I was using it so much. But also the accessibility, I
Yeah,
think too, because and that's what a phone is. Like we touch it hundreds of times a day,
right.
and feel like we need to be accessible to everybody and we need to give an answer right away. And I think social media is kind of like that too. And maybe that's a part of that nervous system as well. Just feeling like I have to respond right when someone comments, or I have to say like it's like that adrenaline rush of the
Yeah.
like button.
Yeah, and even just the overstimulation, right? Just the notifications, just the sheer volume of information. Like God did not create us to be able to consume and process that much information. I was reading something kind of on this topic the other day, and it was telling what I read was that one issue now of the New York Times, like one copy of the New York Times, contains more information than a person in the 1600s would learn over their lifetime. So, like, just think of the volume of information that we are being inundated with. And a lot of times that happens on social media. We'll follow accounts that are similar to what we're doing. And all of a sudden now we have like, oh, when I wake up tomorrow, I have 700 other like reels or ideas or programs or offerings or whatever it is. Not to mention all the other stuff, parenting and family and what have you. So yeah, there's definitely a ton of stimulation coming from social media overall that can be really, really dysregulating to our systems.
Wow, yeah, information overload. We are in the tech world, information overload, and then we don't always do everything with it, so it just sticks in our brain, or we have all
Yeah.
these to-dos and all the things that we can never get done, and we don't feel like we can keep up. And
Yeah.
I know that it can all lead to burnout, like even just information overload, but social media itself. When you were talking about the nervous system, and then it ultimately leading to burnout, tell us a little bit about how that happens.
Yeah. So what happens with burnout is that there are, our body's always communicating, right? Our brain is communicating. There are signals that are going on. Are we safe? Are we not safe? Do we have to move? Do we have to not move? Like, and in response to that, our brain is releasing hormones to mobilize us and enable us to live life, right? Respond to life as it hits us. But what happens in burnout is that, you know, if we think about just even in our evolution as human beings, like a long time ago, what we had to respond to as far as threats to our physical safety is very different than how it looks today, right? In 2024. So, back a long time ago, if there was a threat of like our physical safety, maybe like we're being chased by a lion or a tiger or something like that, our body spurs us into action, into what we call a fight or flight response, right? And we would literally have to run or we would literally have to fight in order to deal with this threat to our life. And we would actually do that and we would metabolize these different hormones. And then ultimately we would either run or we would fight and we would survive. And then maybe we just, processed it with our family and we would have a good meal and a good night's rest. And we would return to baseline stress level. But what happens now in the 21st century is that we're programmed to run like this. This is how God designed our bodies. But we are stuck in a chronic and constant stressor, right? It's just like now it's financial stress, it's all the things we have to do, it's maybe health issues or whatever it is. So we have that experience that comes when we're dealing with a stressor, but we don't return back to baseline stress level. So we're constantly carrying this load and our body is stuck in a fight or flight response for a lot of us. And when we're stuck in that response for so long, our body can only handle it for so long. And eventually that leads to burnout.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I have been in burnout quite a few times in my life. It's not fun and it's hard to recover from. It's almost like
Yeah.
you really just want to give up everything because it's just so hard to get back going again, physically and mentally. And as we're kind of in the social media world or different things, what are some signs that you see or that like in our nervous systems or signs that we should look for going,
Yeah.
this is maybe going to lead you to burnout if you don't do something about it?
Yeah. So pay attention to your energy levels and your bandwidth. I think a lot of times one of the warning signs of burnout is is exhaustion, but it's not the type of tiredness that like a good night's sleep fixes, right? It's like I've been tired for a long time. I wake up tired, right? I'm tired at 9 a.m. and I'm tired at 2 p.m. and I'm tired when I go to bed. Another one is noticing how social you feel. Like a lot of times when we're entering burnout, like the thought of going out with our friends for dinner, that just feels like a lot of work and it feels exhausting. So we'd rather just stay home and we start withdrawing and we start isolating. How passionate are you about things that you used to be really passionate about? So if all of a sudden things that you remember doing, even in your workspace, that used to be really exciting for you, going out and meeting new people, networking, creating things, if all of a sudden all of that seems like a drag or it just seems like a chore, that's a good indication that you're entering burnout. If your creativity feels zapped, right? We can't create from a space of burnout. So if all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're like, man, I just feel like all my creativity is gone, that's a great sign that you're entering burnout. And then a lot of the things like the mental and emotional things that we talk about. So things like brain fog, noticing that you're spacing out a lot, forgetfulness, you open the fridge and you don't know why you did. Like a lot of these can be signs that we're entering burnout. And then there's also physical signs. So if you're struggling with things like insomnia or gut issues or chronic muscle tension, headaches, aching joint pain, even autoimmune conditions, those can all be indications that your body's in a deep state of burnout.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Great to know these things so we can kind of think about them and see, okay, I'm feeling this way. What does that mean? How can I jump back? And I know that you have some ideas for how to recover from burnout. Like, let's say we're getting to that point or we are at the point. Maybe some listeners are like, I've been burnt out for months now and I
Mhm.
don't know how to get back.
Yeah.
How do we recover from it?
Yeah, so that's great. So I have a group program where we go through my 6-step framework to recover from burnout. So I'll give you guys the 6 steps really quick. But the first one is learning how to close that stress loop. So we get into a stressor. How do I get my body back to baseline stress level? And those are body based, like somatic exercises to help bring safety to your body so you can return to baseline stress level. The second one is really looking at your habits and your routines, right? What are the things that I'm doing that is causing a dysregulation or causing burnout in my system? And how can I change that? So, what am I doing to nourish my body, right? Am I basic things like, am I getting enough sleep? Am I drinking enough water? Things like that. Third thing we talk about is our coping mechanisms. So, a lot of us think that the things that we're doing, probably things that got us into burnout, are just part of our personality, right? I'm an overachiever. I'm a type A, I'm a, whatever things that we think that we are that actually aren't part of our personality at all. They're all coping mechanisms. So taking a look at why we got into these patterns to begin with, what's been motivating that and where that comes from, and then how can we put some really safe parameters and boundaries around those to serve us better. And then we talk about emotional hygiene. So often, many of us do not have the tools to deal with our emotions. And if we continue to suppress emotions, that will cause burnout and nervous system dysregulation. That takes a huge toll on our body. We don't realize that. And then the last two things we talk about are boundaries and mindset. So we go through what are some boundaries that we can put in place to protect our joy, to protect our peace, to protect our bandwidth, and then some mindset. And in that mindset piece, we really focus on how can I become someone who is, right? That I'm in a be state instead of someone who's always focused on having or doing, because those are very different places energetically from which to operate your business or live or anything.
Yeah, so true. What a great process and great steps to be thinking about. And I know that you also have a free resource for listeners to help them with the burnout process. You have the Heal Your Burnout private podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what they'll get from it?
Yeah, sure. So that is a 5-part private podcast. It's 5 really short, actionable episodes. It's completely free. You just need to sign up and you'll get access to it wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. And inside of that five episode private podcast, I go through actually each of those 6 steps in further detail. So I give you some ideas on how you can start to implement each one of them and some things you can put into place today that don't cost any money that can really make a big difference in your energy levels and your focus and your productivity and ultimately your peace and your presence.
I love it. So make sure you grab that. We'll leave a link in the notes. Also, as we're kind of wrapping up, I have a couple more questions for you. But one of the questions I want to address is the number one reason most entrepreneurs rely on social media for their marketing, which is not the reason of we're told to do it. Like, what is that
Mhm.
reason? I know that you have some theories behind this for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the number one reason, and like you said, this is just my theory. I don't have it's not based on any research or anything, but, it's a lot easier, I should say, to be able to sit behind your screen and record a reel that you can, take 70 takes on and, write something out or use some B-roll that you have recorded and put it out there without, there's such a low bar for error, I think, when it comes to social media, but it's so different when we or have an invitation to be vulnerable and do other types of marketing in our business to pitch ourselves to be in other people's audiences, right? To speak on things like this, like summits. That feels like live TV, right? And that can feel really scary. One, to put ourselves out there and then possibly be rejected. But then second, to actually show up and be able to deliver requires a different level, I think, of nervous system regulation. So I think it can feel a lot safer when we're getting stuck in the playing small and all the stories to just sit behind our social media and put stuff out there and not be live. But I think that will only take us so far, especially if our people want to get to know us and then like us and then trust us and then buy from us, right? At some point they actually have to see the real us, but it's hard to do that with like pre-recorded batch stuff, I think, on social media.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head because we can hide behind our social media. And the other thing that we can do, because it does take time to create the posts and to create the reels and create whatever we're doing, we can feel
Yeah.
like we're working. We're doing the work that it's going to take to bring the results. But like we
Mhm.
just talked about in the beginning, it's not really the big driver of sales or clients. Yes, it's a great place to nurture, it's a great place to engage. Maybe you will get a sale or two, but we can fool ourselves by thinking we're doing all this work and we're banging our head against a wall going, why is it not working for me? But it's
Right.
because we're hiding behind it.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Yeah, it's not actually moving the needle, right? But it feels like we're doing something that's good for our business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about pitching ourselves in business in ways that do feel more vulnerable. If we're
Mhm.
doing it off of social media, how can we optimize our nervous system so that we can have the confidence to do that?
Yeah. So when we are in a place of fight or flight, so if something, right, our nervous system ultimately, its purpose and its number one priority always will be to keep us safe, right? So things that feel safe, things that do not feel vulnerable, things that feel comfortable will always be its priority. So speaking live or putting ourselves out there and pitching to other things can feel really unsafe and can send us into that kind of fight or flight stress response. So I think the first thing is just understanding that this anxiety that I'm feeling around this or the fear I'm feeling around this is totally normal, right? And it's actually, a protective measure that's biologically built into us. And it's also actually safe for us to do these things. So we can kind of bypass it, right? And move forward. But when we actually show up in these spaces, we want to be able to have access to the parts of our brain that allow us to reach our highest levels of communication, right? And people skills and compassion and empathy and seeing things from different perspectives and all of these different things. That's our prefrontal cortex. And when we're in fight or flight, we actually don't have access to that part of our brain. That's why we might find that if you're really nervous, like your heart's beating so fast that you kind of blank out or you space out or you lose your words or you're kind of mumbling or whatever it is. So you want to have tools in place, body based tools to help bring your nervous system to a space of regulation so you can have access to that part of your brain that allows you to show up most powerfully. And the biggest thing I think to understand within that is that our nervous system does not speak a verbal language. So there have been times maybe where you felt really anxious to speak live somewhere or to pitch yourself somewhere and you've said things like, "Hey Michelle, like just calm down. It's going to be okay. You're prepared, right? Like you got this." And it doesn't really have that much of an impact on our body, right? On our physiology. Our heart's still racing and our hands feel sweaty and we're still losing our words and whatever it is. And it's because our body doesn't speak a verbal language. So we have to communicate with our body in the way in which our body understands. And that's through movement, that's through breath, that's through sound, that's through gentle touch. So having tools in your back pocket that can help bring regulation to your body, certain types of movement or breath or whatever it is, can be really, really powerful in preparing yourself and your nervous system to be able to show up how you want to be able to show up when those opportunities come your way.
So important. And I
Mhm.
love that you're talking about there are ways, let's gain that confidence that you need just to go out there, branch out a little bit out of social media, right? Just take that first
Yeah.
step. And our nervous system, we can actually work it in our benefit. So, in all that we talked about today, if you could wrap it all up in one big takeaway, what would
Mm.
that be for listeners from our conversation? What do you want them to do first?
I think the first step in all of this is growing in awareness, right? I think so many of the things that we do, we're not even aware that we're doing them, so that it's hard to then do something about them, right? Awareness will always precede choice. So I think if we can start approaching a lot of the things that we do, especially in business, from a place of curiosity instead of a place of judgment, right? Instead of being like, oh man, I could never speak live at this thing, or I could never pitch myself here. I don't have the confidence yet. Instead of that judgment coming forth, man, how can we approach that with curiosity? Wow, like, why am I feeling like I'm not qualified to speak there? Right? Is that actually true? And it takes 2 minutes to do an exploration like that with yourself, but getting in the pattern of really checking the ways in which you're thinking, the patterns in which you're thinking, and challenging them. And then, you know, taking courage. I think, sometimes we think that courage is just going to come or we're just going to find it. But the Bible's pretty clear that we've got to take courage. So I think a lot of times we're waiting for confidence to come. But that's not how it works, right? God's like, step out in faith. And then as a result, right, as a byproduct of you stepping out in faith, I'll exchange you confidence. And then you'll have confidence the next time that you do it. But you got to step out in faith first. So really approaching things with curiosity instead of judgment, and then stepping out in faith before confidence, I think are pretty good starting places.
Ooh, I love that ending right there because it's like the saying, courage is not the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and doing it anyway, but then you'll
Yeah.
gain the confidence as you do it. And so,
Yes.
yeah, that's so powerful. What a takeaway from this conversation today. Now, I know also listeners are going to want to connect with you. You do have the Calm Mom podcast. Tell us a little bit about it and where they can find it.
Yeah, so the Calm Mom podcast, it's everywhere that you listen to podcasts. We release episodes twice a week, and it's really aimed at giving high achieving women really practical, tangible tools that they can implement at any time. Most of the nervous system regulating techniques that I teach are about 2 to 3 minutes, is how long it takes, really for anxiety, overwhelm, and burnout. So, teaching you how to get out of your head, because so many of us are so good in the stories and everything that's looping and ruminating and racing up there, and teaching you how to get into your body to really find practices that make a difference for anxiety, overwhelm, and burnout.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. Michelle, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for this incredible session. It was packed with so much value for listeners, and I could talk to you all day long. But yeah, I appreciate you being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I had a great time and I hope you did too. Before we go though, if you resonate with this episode, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or sharing it with a friend, as it helps grow the podcast. Also, if you're not a part of the Red Hot Accountability Club, what are you waiting for? It's a private online community away from the noise of social media that provides coaching, support, and encouragement as you go after your biggest goals in business or life in a stressless, no hustle kind of way. Inside the club, you will own your own results, hold yourself accountable, and lean on others for support. If you've been looking for a simple, off social media way to grow, then this is it. Head on over to redhotmindset.com/RHA to learn more and join us today. Again, that's redhotmindset.com/RHA. And I can't wait to welcome you into the club. In all things I pray, you just run your race. I believe in you.